Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the workshop number 80, Languages on the Move, Deploying Multilingualism on the
Systems, heterogeneous networks and languages, and I think we should be thinking in terms of the addressing system in the same way, that diversity in this sense is a great strength. So what is an IDN, an internationalized domain name? I think for many people in this room it needs no introduction, but I'm just going to explain it anyway. You see on the slides two different examples of IDN, local language domain names. Now, for many years it wasn't possible to register domain names in non-Latin scripts all the way through the chain, and so you see at the top you have paradigma.eu, you have the Greek script example.eu in Latin script. That's called, in the terminology, a second level IDN. But from 2009 or so, it became possible to register in local languages right through the domain name, and that's what you have at the bottom example. You have an example from the Russian, a summary of where we are in terms of the stats and the numbers. I'm going to talk about IDNs, local language domain names, as drivers of linguistic diversity and how that's showing through the evidence when we look at the content, the language of content associated with these local language domain names and the patterns of registration and hosting, and they come through very clearly to demonstrate how local they are. I'll also just touch very briefly on the issue of universal acceptance, or in other words, how these actually work or don't work. And Mark McFadden will be dealing with that issue in more detail. I'll also cover industry opinions, what the experts at the registries and the registrars think about these IDN, local language domain names, and also lastly ICANN's new GTLD program and whether that has fulfilled the promise of introducing more linguistic diversity. Here's a clue: it hasn't. There's an awful lot in the report that I'm not going to cover because of lack of time, but I really urge you, if you're interested, to read the report. There is particularly a focus on the experience in Arab states, which we have colleagues who will cover their experiences and work that ICANN is doing in that area, as well as the local registries and also country case studies. So, brief headline of the numbers. There are now 6 million domain names in non-Latin script in the world. That's an increase of roughly 800,000 since last year. 2%, just 2% of the world's domain names are in non-Latin script. But the growth is quite phenomenal. There's been over 200% growth in the last 5 years, but as it doesn't take very much thought to understand that when you're starting with low numbers and reach it, you can get into triple-digit percentage growth quite readily. In terms of the growth rates of the different levels of IDN, local language domain names, the things that are really growing very strongly at the moment are the full IDN.IDN, in other words, the Cyrillic script, the Chinese script, where you're getting the same uniform language all the way through. Those are showing growth of over 100% in the last year. GTLD IDN growth has been 46% in the last year, but that's mainly because a couple of registries have launched, and that normally gives a very healthy spike. In contrast, the country code IDNs, which tend to be at the second level, have actually shrunk a little bit this year. We now are aware of 50 registries that are offering internationalized domain names at the second level, 26 all the way through at the top level, and 2 new GTLDs as part of the ICANN program. So the first topic I wanted to just 6 million and looking at the primary language of those. And you see again the skew in favour of English language is still very present, that you've got 55% of web pages are in the English language when you're looking at the entirety or a very large sample, and that all of the other languages get squeezed as a result. Now, when we looked, what we did was we looked at about 1 million domain names with content associated with them. A lot of those was as a result of the cooperation with VeriSign. We were looking at the Common Net ones, we looked at the .eu ones, and we looked at all of the ones in the open zone files in the GTLDs. And of those that had web content associated with them, that's what you see on the bottom line. And this is really the same chart, but just with another bar added. And so the headline is, it's different. With local language domain names, the spread of languages associated with them is different from the general picture. And you're getting much more of languages like Chinese, proportionately more Japanese, Russian, and so on, Korean as well. So that tells us something, doesn't it? I think it does, anyway. The next slide I want to show is when you look at the registrations of all top-level domains in the world. This is borrowed from the Oxford Internet Institute, who've done an analysis of internet populations. That's the colours, so the deeper the red colour, the greater the internet population is. So for the US, you've got over 100 million users, the same with China. And the larger the circle is, the more domain names there are registered in that country. And what they did was they took the top-level domain, the country codes, they just took the numbers, and with the generics, which aren't naturally associated with any country, they took the country of hosting. So this is a nice, I think this is a robust picture. And what you see, I think, is North America and Northern Europe in brief terms. China is there really because of the size of its population, not because it's really starting to fulfill its potential. And we did the same exercise looking at internationalized domain names or local language domain names. And again, the picture is different. What you see is that these local language domain names are registered in the country where you would expect them. The countries which have most need are least served by the Latin scripts and have most need for linguistic diversity in the navigation system. So Russia, huge. China, huge. And you're also getting, you're going east and you're going a little bit south as well. So the other thing that we looked at was how the script of these IDN, local language domain names, correlates to the language of the content associated with them. So if there was no relationship whatsoever, you would expect a completely random pattern. So you've got these, these domain names in whatever, Russian, Korean, Chinese language. If there was no relationship whatsoever, you just get a jumble of website languages associated with them. But that's not the case at all. So this chart is looking in the colours, they are showing different scripts. So on the far left, if you're looking at it, is Arabic script. And if you have a Persian language website or an Arabic language website in our pool, which all have IDNs, they are all associated with Arabic script domain names. The same goes for Greek, say, or for Russian, Bulgarian, these language, Ukrainian, are only associated with Cyrillic script domain names and no others. The same Korean. Korean is only associated with Hangul script domain names. There is a really remarkable correlation. Now, it's a remarkable correlation. It's not a remarkable fact because anybody would be able to tell you this, but it's remarkable that the data does show it. Where you start to get random patterns are over on the other side of the chart, where you're getting into kind of English language. That's associated with all sorts of scripts, domain names, and you can kind of understand why. The same with French, that these are often used as the languages of translation on a site. And then there are others which I think that the others, like Portuguese and Danish, I think that those are more a product of automated translation tools not quite getting it right, although they're fantastically accurate in most cases. In a minority of cases, there's startling inaccuracy. So when we looked at the .eu domains, very similar patterns. You've got the Cyrillic script domain names associated with Bulgarian and Russian sites, Greek, and then everything else with Latin script. Exactly what you would expect. The same correlation is found when you look at where these domain names are hosted. Now, a few years ago, the Internet Society, UNESCO, and the OECD collaborated on a project which showed that there was a very strong correlation between between local servers and local language content. Sorry. And what we've done here is looked at the script of an IDN and the country where that IDN is hosted. So the orangey kind of figure, the orangey colour that you see over in North America indicates mixed script, so no script is a winner. And that you can see in places like Germany, US, Canada, where you have very strong international hosting countries. But just look at the story over to the east of the map. You see Cyrillic script domain names. This is looking primarily in .com and the open zone files. We didn't have access to the ccTLDs, but the Cyrillic script domains, they're hosted in Russia, or they're hosted in CIS countries to a lesser degree. Han script you see in China, you see mixed with katakana and hiragana in Japan, you see Hangul only in Korea, that's it. Thai in Thailand, that's it, and so on. So you've got this really strong association. People are hosting where they are registering their local language domain names. So the next topic we will be looking at is, how do these things work? How well are they working? So-called universal acceptance. And that we define as the relative ease of use, predictability and memorability of IDNs in internet services and applications. Now this is really a key issue because domain names don't have to do an awful lot. They have to work on web pages, in email, they have to work in other contexts. But if they don't work in those, then when we look at usage, and I'm looking here at .eu IDNs, and I think this is a good message on, it might be the, universal acceptance, or it might be the impact of mixed script domain names, because you can see you've got under .eu, the Latin script, you've got 3 scripts happening. You've got Latin with accents, Cyrillic and Greek, and you can see immediately that Cyrillic and Greek, the mixed script .eu domain names are less used because they involve changing keyboards. And, they're generally speaking, the usage rates of IDNs is lower than general. But human beings being what they are, creative and good at working around things, are adapting even to limited functionality. And I think that this, for me, really shows the utility and the appeal of local language domain names. And this was provided to me by Irina from the Russian registry, is that people are using the .rf domain names in advertising because people remember them, they understand them and they remember them. So they see them as they're passing by, they see them really fleetingly, they remember them, they go online, and like the green truck in this picture is going to redirect. So the people providing it use the domain name for what it is, very memorable to the local user, and then use the ASCII domain names as the primary domain through a redirect. Industry opinions I'm not going to go into in much detail. We send out a survey each year. Generally, people are getting more depressed. that's about it. The confidence levels are getting lower each year, which I think is a pity, because if the industry is not fully confident in these as a product, that will impact on their choices for investment and on their belief in it, on impact. We seem to be locked in a negative cycle. You've heard me saying this for a couple of years. Low user uptake is a result of poor user experience, and if you don't see these around, then not many people know they exist, and so that perpetuates this negative cycle. The new GTLD program, nearly 2,000 applications. It was supposed to be meeting unmet needs, and multilingualism is obviously an unmet need. Only 100 or so of these 2,000 applications were in non-Latin scripts. But I went through and looked at the meaning of the new GTLD endings. I can't believe I did this, but I did it. So that excluded brands and excluded meaningless abbreviations. But we've got on the top languages in the world with over 50 million speakers, and you can see a nice diverse and fairly evenly spread picture. And the bottom layer is the results of this, the meaning of new GTLDs in the ICANN program. And in brief, it means that 90% are either in English or meaningful in English. So in fact, it's actually less diverse. Before we can get mass uptake, a lot of things need to be in place, and universal acceptance is identified by our industry people as the key issue, as well as user awareness. So, there is continued growth. IDNs, local language domain names, definitely support linguistic diversity, and cognitive factors that Giovanni referred to, like ease of recall, context understanding, they really support the need for local language domain names. Universal acceptance is critical, but it's slowly improving. There's more to be done, but there is huge growth potential in this area, huge. And so we must keep working at the different layers of the stack to realize this potential. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emily. And before leaving the floor to Pat Kane of VeriSign, I'd like to ask you if you have any question about what Emily has just introduced, including, you can even complement what Emily just said as she mentioned icons. She mentioned several registries, so feel free to, step in the discussion and take the floor. Just raise your hand, and I see there's a question from Peter, please, and can you please introduce yourself as well for the remote speakers and for the scribes?
Thank you, Giovanni. My name is Peter van Rosten from Center. Congratulations, Emily. I think it's really a good report, and not just because Giovanni suggested that we point that out. And it's a very useful yearly update. Really appreciate that. I had one question. I was fascinated by the reduction of diversity on the new GTLD program. So what happened between application time and the outcome of that process? Is it all the IDNs applying for .web in Chinese, and then so from 10 being reduced to 1, or what happened there?
What I did was I looked at the applications rather than how they've gone through, because I felt that was actually quite meaningful in terms of what people felt was going to be appealing to the market. So you're right, there were like 10 or more applications for .web or .app or so on. And so each of those counted as one. So this doesn't show you what we're getting at the other side, because it's still too early to tell at that stage. So this is just simply looking at the applications themselves.
Yes, please.
Yeah. My name is John Dada from Nigeria. I found this study very fascinating, and more fascinating to think that linguistic diversity can be a strength. my personal experience is it's been used very divisively in places. Are you aware of any similar study done for African languages, for example, by UNESCO or anywhere else?
Not on the CCTLDs, and I'm hoping that as this project continues, that through the cooperation of the African CCTLD registry, we can get more data, because we're very reliant on personal relationships and getting the data from people individually. So, would you please?
I think your comment was interesting as far as UNESCO is concerned. Although we partner with URIT for this report every year, and we find it extremely valuable, we also have the only normative instrument in the world it is called a recommendation on the promotion and use of multilingualism in cyberspace. And the reason for which, in spite of all the difficulties that we encounter in getting a normative instrument accepted in UNESCO or any other agency for that matter, to give you an example, it took us 10 years or more to get the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity adopted. 10 years to recognize that cultural diversity is important. So in terms of multilingualism, we have this binding normative instrument, and what we do is we ask all, because it's a normative instrument, we have the possibility of requesting all our member states, including African member states, to submit a comprehensive report on what have they done to promote local content, multilingualism in cyberspace in their respective countries. And that report gives us a fairly good sense, and it's very clear that there are great disparities. Some countries are really active in promoting local languages, other countries, even within Africa, are not doing as much. So that gives us then a chance of going back to our member countries and saying that why are you not doing enough? You know, it's a binding instrument. In fact, in line with this, Giovanni, if you permit me, we also have a very interesting platform called the Atlas of World's Endangered Languages. This is an amazing tool. For the moment, we have 2,000 languages which are documented on the tool. And it can give you a fairly accurate picture of which are the languages which are under threat in which parts of the world. It can also give you a fairly good indication as to which languages will disappear, because already, as per recent reports, 43% of the 6,000 existing languages will be gone by the end of the century. So that's almost half the language is gone. So for us to relate it back to what Emily's excellent presentation and report, is that for us we see IDNs as a building block. And for me personally, I feel, coming myself from a developing country, that it also gives you a sense of ownership, that I have my country's name on the site. But then again, as Emily pointed out, there are still lots of gaps. I think on the software side, on the services side, they're not really tuned still to take on IDN, and I think that would be the next big challenge. And I also feel that having an IDN is okay, but if you don't populate it with rich local content, it's just a name. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Please.
Good afternoon, all of you. I just wanted to pick the last point that Emily had shown in the point that there's a huge potential
Sorry,
for...
could you just say your name and...
Yeah, I am Saeed Qazi from India. So one of the last points in the last slide I saw was there's a huge potential for local language content that is, utilized, the scope is wide enough. And recently, last week, I guess, yes, in last week only, Government of India has come up with .bharat. That is, that domain has come up. So since we are. Two things. One, we are very excited because we have now own domain name and own local language and all. But at the same time, we also can see the challenge of how to populate it in terms of, because after 65 years of independence, we have seen the other domains taking the space of digital identities, digital presence and all, with content, populating content in those. Exercise has gone, a huge exercise has already gone over in terms of content, domains and all. And also in .in, India domain .in, that's in English. So the challenges we can see, because for every stakeholders, how to populate this domain, especially the new one, that is the new government has come up with this domain and all. So what do you see as an expert yourself, since you have seen this entire scenario coming up? So how do you see the GOM as a policy challenge as well as an implementation challenge? So what are the two things that you see that also we need to focus as a government, where multi-stakeholders can take a role in populating those domains at a national level also? So
I think that the two issues that are primarily important is the state of the general, there are numerous factors that go to mass uptake. And if you're just talking about domain names in general, they will be things like how large the population is. You're in good. Things like broadband penetration, literacy levels, a whole raft of factors go into that. But then there's also the way that the registries are run themselves. If you want volumes, there are lots of reasons to not have liberal policies, which are perfectly fine. But if you want high volumes, low price, liberal policies for registration, very strong network of local registrars are essential. And the sort of something that we've been talking about into context of the Arab states, where there is great potential to be fulfilled. There are other factors that are inhibiting uptake, such as general immaturity in the downstream markets, the cost of creating content. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but the main thing is to have the domain name and to have it usable. And I think that's going to kind of be covered in others' comments. But before these domain names can be used seamlessly in everywhere that you would expect to use another domain name, then the uptake is going to be inhibited. And as long as you're expecting that and prepared as other country codes, as policymakers, advocacy, what goes across all of the country code registries who have adopted IDNs, local language domain names, is that they are absolutely tireless in advocating them and badgering people, annoying people to make them work better and to really get the uptake working.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, please, Hiro.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Giovanni. May I introduce an illustrative example using under .jp that may complement what Emily presented regarding the relationship between local content and IDNs. We have an interesting example. My observation on it is, for example, .jp has two spaces where IDNs can be registered as well as ASCII labels. One is at the second level in the form of something.jp, and the other is at the third level in the form of something.prefecturename.jp, such as sushi.tokyo.jp. So as to the second level something.jp registration, 13% of the registration are made in IDN format. On the other hand, 25% of the registration are in IDN format when registered as third level something.prefecturename.jp. If I would explain the situation pretty roughly, I would say local content under the prefecture name. Local content can be more suitably presented in IDN label than ASCII label. Further rough guess may conclude that if more local content is coming in the near future, for example from Arabic or from China, from India, more IDNs will be used, of course under the condition that the IDNs can be technically used. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hiro. Really good point. Thank you. Yes, Manal.
Thank you, Giovanni. This is Manal from Egypt, and thanks, Emily, for the very informative report. Just to reflect on what you said on the Arab region, and of course I cannot claim speaking on behalf of all the Arab region, but at least many of them, and Egypt is one. I think challenges that has to do with the uptake of the IDNs primarily starts from having a weak DNS ecosystem or industry in general, even for the ASCII domain names. So we don't have the ecosystem in place in terms of policies, dispute resolution mechanisms for scripts like Arabic, where you do not have this expertise really in other developed countries or Latin-speaking, English-speaking countries. So you have to develop your own expertise in things like this. So it's the ASCII DNS ecosystem, the universal acceptance and user experience, related industries such as local content, of course, e-payment, penetration of e-payment, online services and things like that. And finally, penetrating new markets who are really suffering the language. They have a language barrier and might not even be online as we speak. So they are really new market, new potential market that we have to work on even bringing them online, and they would constitute a good portion of this new potential market. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. I think those are excellent points, and for me it's a very interesting seeing almost a diverging path in the Arab states where you have a real burgeoning of local language content, particularly when people are using social media. That there's a fantastic study coming out of Dubai on social media in Arab states, and showing that people, of course, love to make their comments in their local language. It's again not really rocket science, you would expect it, but there's an enormous enthusiasm for it and a lot of local content being created, and it makes me worry that if we can't actually bring the domain name system back into line with the rapid rate of creativity that's going on for content, that people will seek other solutions, and that would, I think, be very detrimental to the unified internet.
Thank you. Emily, please, Ram.
Thank you. This is Ram Mohan. I'm with affiliates also on the board of ICANN. In India, one of the things that I've been observing is that you see English language or ASCII-based domain names with local content. And it appears, at least in that region, that the trend is that the gateway to get to the content is almost irrelevant, because you can type in that whatever you're looking for, you can type that into a search engine in your local language, and Google, for example, will bring back the correct site, even if the site is actually written in ASCII. So there seems to be some level of divergence between content in the language and the actual identifier for the place to go to that content also needing to be in that language.
I think that's absolutely right. It's quite an irony, really, because one of the reasons that the domain name system developed in the first place was because domain names were much more memorable and meaningful for individuals than the numbers that they translate to. And what you're describing is almost a sort of a similar workaround, is that search is kind of stepping in. However, I do think that domain names are so ubiquitous, and it's perhaps one of the things that comes through in discussions on universal acceptance or how these are used, is that that domain names are in fact everywhere. When you're trying to adapt to include local languages, you have to think about search results, you have to think about usernames in user accounts, certification, DNS policy, the works. I hear this argument about search a lot. I'm not completely convinced that it is a substitute, though, because I think what it does is it relegates people who don't have that understanding of the ASCII to having a second best, in a way. And you saw with the Russian vans that there's such a utility in having something memorable for direct navigation, and that while search is fantastic and the technology is amazing in getting to where you didn't think you knew you wanted to go, where you know exactly where you want to go, it's really important to be able to remember and type in a name, in my opinion.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Satish Babu. I'm from India as well. I have 3 quick comments. The first is the fact that we have taken so long to operationalize IDNs, that content has actually gone ahead. For many communities in India, the content is already there using Latin labels. And to get them to come back to, there is a low incentive to get them to come to IDNs at large. So this is one issue that, I see. The main content providers are newspapers, blogs, the government, and most of all, Wikipedia. And all of them have actually kind of been available for quite some time with Latin labels. So there's very low incentive to now get into a new regime with IDNs. I don't know how we're going to overcome that. The second is the earlier pointed out issue of usability. We have complex scripts which are very difficult to use, especially on tablets and mobile phones. It's very, very hard to kind of squeeze these keyboards onto these devices. So that's another problem. I don't know how we're going to fully overcome that, especially considering the fact that the young people are using SMS in the Latin script. They are not moving into any of the so-called local scripts for SMS. So it is the next generation will have even more problems in using these scripts. It's not a good thing culturally, but that's where we are. And finally, I also wonder at times, although I fully see the reason for IDNs, whether we are fragmenting the internet further with IDNs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Would you like to address? No, just because there is apparently 2 more people who like to take the floor and a remote participant. So, and time is not on our side. So, yeah, please.
In fact, it's coming from India and the 3rd Indian speaker to take the floor. You can see we are a democracy, and a very vibrant one at that. But the point is, both Mr. Ramon and the later speaker, I didn't get your name, I think it's very important that we do not look at this issue in a homogenized manner. A country like India functions very differently from any other country in the world. For example, a huge percentage of my generation cannot write in our mother tongue. So for us, if you tell us, script issue, etc., the one you mentioned there is critical. I mean, there are a lot of people who are writing to me in Bengali, which is my mother tongue, but using Latin script. So we've created a new language of sorts. Second point to respond to your first issue is that, like Mr. Ramon said, I think while waiting for IDNs to come, we have become also very innovative. We use Latin script, we have put all our local content up, and there is a lot of catch-up to do. And therefore, the last point that you make, again, I'll take it not only from fragmenting the web perspective, but what would be the dividends today when people have moved ahead and know their favorite websites and get all the local content? What would be the real dividend in this context, where we've really moved so far ahead, with I don't know how many 100 million users in India today, in terms of getting, in terms of moving ahead with this idea. And so these are very relevant questions, but very specific to India. With, I don't know, several hundred or several thousand languages, the matters become far more complicated. Plus, it's got a very large pool of English-speaking people. And that, again, makes things very different.
Thanks a lot, Indrajit. There is a question from the remote participation.
Kafu from Ganu. With a number of Africans not literate in the English language, how can African languages be incorporated into the current IDN scripts to enable app developers build local apps that are relevant to local users? Mikrofon. Mikrofonu bakar mısın?
We have Fad from ICANN who likes to take up the question, and eventually Mark from the more technical perspective. Thank you, Fad.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fahad Bataina. I work for ICANN. One of the things I do at ICANN, I actually work as a stakeholder engagement coordinator for the Middle East. And actually, in the Middle East, we have a strategy, a Middle East strategy. And one of the outcomes of the strategy was the birth of a task force on Arabic script IDNs. Now, in answer to the gentleman from Ghana, I can speak about languages, let's say languages, African languages that use the Arabic script. So I believe in Africa there is a huge number of languages that actually use the Arabic script, Fulfilde. I mean, there is a huge list of names that one would not imagine actually. And so how could Africa get more involved in let's say, the multilingual internet and probably domain names, let's say internationalized domain names, I would say is to be part of such initiatives. So actually within the task force on Arabic script IDNs, we are suffering from actually getting folks from Africa to actually be part of the discussions related to the Arabic script. I guess it would be the same case for, let's say, other languages that are using other scripts.
And this is Mark McFadden. I wrote part of the universal acceptance part of this. And what I would also say to the remote participant from Ghana is that there is an immediate opportunity at the CCTLD level to have an impact in the near future in terms of getting other languages into IDNs. I think that is a significant short-term opportunity. One of the things is in terms of IDN applications in the new GTLD round, we saw very few from Africa. And I would think that on a policy basis, working in the ICANN environment, whether it's through the GAC or through the GNSO, ensuring that there are mechanisms in place to give, if not enhanced treatment, the ability for the African community and the people who have languages that are underrepresented in the IDN community, a way to have better results in the second or future rounds of new GTLDs. I think that would also be an important development, because as we see in this year's report, the IDN component of the new GTLD program was fairly disappointing, both in terms of the languages represented and also, as Emily pointed out in her remarks, the meanings of the strings that were represented. And so finally, for the person from Ghana, I think engagement in the ICANN process for future new GTLD programs is essential.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yes, please.
My name is Tariq Mirghani from Sudan. In fact, I am in the FTLD IDN working group. I am the head of that working group. So my responsibility more is about developing using of the IDN in Africa. So in fact there is, and also I am a member of the Arabic GP generation panel for Arabic language. So my concern is I'm focusing on using Arabic script in Africa, in African languages. In fact, there is more than 40 languages in Africa using Arabic script. Sometimes they are not the official script for the country, but it's all there is there, and it's already used by a lot of people there. Some problems we are facing, very strange problems in Africa. Sometimes some character using, for example in Arabic script, they are not even in the Unicode. So it's they are lacking, very behind. They need to approve these characters as the Unicode phase, then go to think about internet about IDN. And that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. If I may just very quickly, I think that your final remark about some of the characters used in African languages are not they're not present in Unicode, which means that they're not possible to reflect in a domain name at the moment. I think this highlights the importance of initiatives like the Task Force on Arabic IDNs, which Fahad spoke about, and that I'm lurking on that list and can see the care that all of the participants are taking to ensure that they are actually scanning all of the languages that they need to be thinking about. But of course it relies on the sum of knowledge of the participants. But this is an incredibly important piece of work because, okay, it's going to be generating rules to create domain names, but because a lot of the participants are actually managers of domain name registries, you can anticipate that those rules will then be they will be pulled across into the registry policies and will ensure that the domain names will work outside of national borders or outside of linguistic borders so that they will resolve universally. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like now to give the floor finally to Pat, very sign, and then immediately afterwards to Sarah, and then we may take up more questions from the floor. Thank you, Pat, and then Sarah.
Thank you, Giovanni. I do want to thank Giovanni and Emily for giving us the opportunity to work with them on this project. It's really been a pleasure, and one of the really great things about data is the more data that you find, the more questions you have about the data. I know that when I read one of the early versions of the document, and some of the work that Mark had done, we went through and we said, oh, well, what about this? Do we have this data? Sure. I am now in control. So, one of the things about the data, we asked a lot of questions about it, and Emily's like, I don't think we have time, and we got to cut it this way and do that. So we've got plenty of work that we're going to do for next year's version of the document, so I'm looking forward to continuing working with both Emily and Giovanni on this. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, just a couple of slides. One, this is the disappointing slide. This is the slide that has taken us forever to get to where we are today. I can remember back in 1998 and 2000 when we had an argument about IDNs and the DNS itself as to whether we were going to remain with ASCII in the DNS or actually use something like UTF-8 or UTF-16, which actually would have made this problem that we have with universal acceptance almost completely go away. And for those of you who don't really know what ASCII is, it's the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. We're going to geek out on this all day today. So anyway, so as Emily talked about, there's 6 million domains, 6 million IDNs today, which this slide's not updated for that. We launched in .com, November of 2000, we launched IDNs. And so the state of affairs for IDNs has not changed dramatically since then, and it's really the universal acceptance. And we're trying to do a lot of work within organizations like W3C to put together an open source set of objects and tools so that people can actually build websites. I mean, it's great that mail works, it's great that browsers work, that's navigating, but when you want people to use as their primary email address an IDN, you want to be able to use that as your user ID when you go to social networks. So when you put in your user ID and you type in xn-br549.com, what am I doing, right? And so there's still a long way to go, and we continue to work on that. One of the also important dates is the ICANN new GTLD program. So it was approved at the Paris ICANN meeting in June of 2008. It's back when we didn't have a whole lot of IDN traffic, and we'd had smaller populations around the globe. VeriSign applied for 12 transliterations of .com and .net in local scripts, and every year I've had to go back and re-justify my budget for that. And when I do that, I've got to go in and talk about what the market size looks like. And so the most disappointing thing this past year is when we went into China, to where 6 years ago, China had an online population of about 125, 130 million, where today it's over 650 million is their online population today. We went through into the market study, the focus study, and the answer was, those things are for old people. So people, to the point that's been made a couple of times already, people are very, very comfortable using as their identifier an ASCII domain name, an English character-based domain name. So, yes, disappointing. So, just to follow up on one of those slides that Emily talked about, 2% of the IDNs today are IDNs. 1% of those, or 50% of those domain names, are non-Latin. So when you say Latin, they are extended Latin characters, so that includes the ñes, the cedillas, accented vowels, umlauts. Those characters, 50% of the 6 million IDNs are some Latin-based language. We'll jump to this one. So when we talk about growth, I'll talk about just 2 slides about .com specifically. This is the growth of active .com domain names that are IDNs. So we've got over 1.2 million IDNs and about almost 700,000 of them. This is the end of 2013, so over 700,000 result in active live content, which is good. That's a good percentage in terms of what are being used. But the one that I am excited about, and I use this one a lot with my CFO, is when you talk about how domains are being used, they're actually content. So this is over a 9-month period in 2013 for 3 different scripts, and this is done as a percentage. So as you take a look at Hebrew, this would be the complete set of Hebrew domain names that are IDNs, that Hebrew content in .com. So of those that are using an IDN, that's that. And those are using an ASCII-based domain name are these. And this column here shows domain names used as a redirect. So basically these, again, are redirecting to Hebrew content. And the important thing to look here is that it's growing. So in this 9-month period, and so this is really towards the end of last year, new GTLD contracts are being signed, people are getting excited about the program. So even though we have a lot of people that are comfortable, younger populations are comfortable with the ASCII scripts and not gravitating, especially in larger markets, they're not gravitating towards the IDN visually, we do see more utilization. And to Emily's point earlier, more utilization drives more awareness, drives more adoption, drives more utilization. It becomes a big circle at that point in time. I'm really excited about the Korean market. When we go into Korea, Korea is one of the places that is really, I mean, everybody's really passionate about their language. One thing I've learned in doing this for 14 or 15 years, and just one point of note, we need Carrie Karp in the room to actually have the original IDN guidelines group here today. Anyway, how you doing, Mohammed? So, I don't know where I was going, but anyway, so Korea, the reason I'm really passionate about Korea is Korea hates English. They hate seeing the English language, English characters all over the place. And so we're starting to see the IDNs, is that right? Yeah. Sorry? Every time I go there, I get to talk in English for about 30 minutes and people go, tired of hearing English, and I sit and drink a beer. It's not a bad thing, but it's what I do. So, but this is very exciting that you see so much more usage in .com domain names that have Korean content using an IDN. And so the utilization statistics are showing that there is growth and there is improvement in legacy operations. With the new GTLD program, we've got 2 or 3 Chinese new GTLDs that are out now. They're seeing growth. I mean, a large percentage of their domain names today are reserved for the government. But we're seeing utilization, we're seeing growth. I'm going to be excited when Gangsu and Hanlo come online because they've been regionally resolving domain names inside of China for a long, long period of time. And we should see some instant adoption at that point in time. That's really about it, I think. Oh, universal acceptance, still a big problem. And that's it. Sarah.
Do I have to follow that? So Sarah Falvey, I'm at Google, and I don't have slides. I'm just going to sort of talk about sort of what we're seeing, and I'm really excited about IDNs. This is a depressing group. This is, you guys, I think it's going to change, so I don't think we should be depressed. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think, I've been on this panel, I feel like every year for 5 years now, and when we started talking about IDNs, when we started talking about IDNs, I think it was a fault of our community because they were, fast-tracked within ICANN. We developed, technical standards around them, and I think most of us thought, oh my God, the work is done. This is awesome. This is so great. And it took, I think, a lot of conversation with folks in various regions to realize that there's this adoption issue that has really been the barrier for why IDNs aren't being used more broadly. And I do credit, frankly, the IGF with a lot of talking about adoption in all the different cases and all the different problems with it, because it's really spurred, I think, a lot of different working groups and things like that getting going. And I can speak personally from Google's perspective. You know, as it was mentioned earlier, we just announced that IDNs will resolve in Gmail. And a lot of that is because, you know, we heard people talking about it in forums like this, and we sort of realized kind of what the problem is, and we're still doing a lot more work. There's a lot more announcements that are going to be coming in terms of how far IDNs will work in our products, and obviously we're just one company, but I will say one of the great parts about the new GTLD program is that even though there weren't a lot of IDNs that were applied for, there were a lot of companies and civil society groups and governments who maybe didn't realize kind of the adoption issue that are now intimately involved with domain names in a way that they never have been before, and they're definitely paying attention, I think, a lot more than they ever have. We're one of the companies that applied for one of the generic IDNs. We have .mina, which launched in Japan earlier this year, and we've just seen its full ASCII registrations. We've seen lots of interest in it in Japan, and we've seen lots of stuff going on with that IDN. And so I think, so there's the technical side of things where we need to have them work universally. But I think the other side of things that we're going to see is there's never been a lot of marketing around IDN. So all the discussions that people had about, well, they'd rather just work in ASCII. Well, do we know that, or is it familiar? For good or bad reasons, it may just be familiar, and there's never been a lot of discussion introducing local communities into what an IDN is, how they can use it, how it might be beneficial for their community. And I think with a lot of these IDNs now coming online, and even with generic ASCII TLDs coming online, one of the things that you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more marketing go into talking about IDNs. And the second thing you're going to see is user behavior is going to change regardless. So I think we've all been brought up in this .com world, and we're all, and it was great for a really long time. There's nothing wrong with .com, but one of the things you're going to see is there's all these different GTLDs out there, whether they're in ASCII or they're in IDN, NCCs, NCC, IDNs, and there's just going to be this mix of things going on, and so it's going to cause users it's going to create a bit of a chaotic situation, which is going to cause users to change their behavior, and they're going to start thinking about, maybe they don't want a .com, maybe they want something else, maybe they want an IDN, and it's going to make more sense, I think, to users, because the whole market's going to change. And some will be successful and some won't, but I think it will just cause people to think about it differently. And so I think I'm really excited about IDNs. I think they're going to be great. And to some of the other questions that people had about not being able to, having to switch keyboards and things like that, there's also really great things going online around language, around virtual keyboards. You know, at Google, we have one that you can download it's a Chrome extension. And it really makes using IDNs, switching from ASCII to IDNs almost seamless. And so I think as more people realize that there are tools out there to help use IDNs and to get online that way, I think they're gonna be really cool, and I think people are gonna do really interesting things with them. So I don't know, I'm really excited.
Thank you, Sarah. And apart from being cool, you have any, plan you may like to share with us at your end to help us, the registry managers, to market IDNs?
So, well, I mean, I don't know if I'm not on that side of things, obviously. I do know that we're obviously marketing our IDN and things like that, and I know that we've partnered with other groups. So for example, we partnered with multiple other registries to develop a sort of test space so that users could go in and test to see if their stuff was going to resolve or not, and kind of to try to help figure out what some of the problems were. So we've been working with lots of registries to figure out sort of the technical side of adoption things. And I think the partnering around the marketing is going to come. There's barely any out there right now. Ours just delegated earlier this year, so.
Thank you, Sarah. And I understand I have a question from the remote participation, but before taking that, if it's possible to give the floor for some minutes to Mark McFadden, who has been the author of the section of the report about universal acceptance, which follows quite well the intervention of Sarah. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. So I'm the balancing act with Sarah. I'm the one who's depressed. And I'm the one that's getting the extra work from Pat, which is good. Our feeling, having done this for a few years in terms of universal acceptance, is one of the things that happened with IDNs quite clearly was there was a focus of using IDNs on the web first, because that was the universal interface to a lot of applications, a lot of online and social services. And what we see in progress through the years is that the web is really doing fairly well. For instance, browsers as a technology do a fairly good job, not universally consistent, but a fairly good job of supporting IDNs. But what we've recognized over the years is that there's far more to it than simply making sure that browsers successfully support IDNs. And in fact, another way to think about universal acceptance is to say, what we'd like to have, what we'd like to finally end up with, is an environment where we could use IDNs anywhere that we'd previously used a legacy domain name. That's really where we would like to end up. And in order to get there, one of the things that we have to understand is that there is a vast environment in which domain names are used. It's not simply the web, and it's not simply email. There's a huge number of environments, technical environments, in which IDNs should be able to be used, which they currently can't be. In this year's report, there's a beginning look at some of those things. For instance, things like digital certificates, policy information that's supported inside of the DNS, things that we use to combat spam. We use the DNS in many, many more ways than simply translating a string into an internet address. Those days where we use the DNS for that are long gone. We use the DNS for much, much more than that. And so one of the things that when Sarah talks about her being excited about it, I would share some of that excitement in this sense, that I think the technical solutions that are barriers for universal acceptance are first of all becoming better known, partly because of this work, but also partly because of other people's work. And then second of all, those barriers are indeed getting worked on. I see real progress there. Now, there are things that are real problems, very difficult problems. For instance, Pat talked about using IDNs and using international email addresses as usernames. We almost invariably, when we sign up for online services, use our email address as a way to identify ourselves. That's fairly primitive, and Pat will tell you that's a very primitive way to identify yourself, but it's so common that we're used to it. And in fact, there's an underlying security problem that goes with it. Imagine that we could get to a day where social networking allows us to actually use scripts that are native to our language, right? That would be an area of real promise. And we know that, for instance, social networking organizations, people who provide support for those, are working on that problem. But I can tell you, and Pat took these words right out of my mouth, it's a very difficult problem. You would say to yourself, oh, well, gee, just change the database to support the Unicode. Regrettably, software is not that simple. The actual identifier is embedded in many, many parts of the social networking services, far beyond just the authentication and identification components. And so it's very difficult for these organizations to make progress. When we hear that Google has actually been able to make mail support internationalized email addresses, one of the things that should be a backstory there is how much work it took. It actually is it's a significant effort. They should be thanked and given a pat on the back for the effort that they've made, and it should spur other people on, because besides being a significant effort, there is a major organization that thought that effort was worth making. What we're seeing now, and I think, again, sort of taking the same medicine that Sarah's on here, being optimistic about things, I would say what we see in this year's report is that the user acceptance problems, the universal acceptance problems, are very, very difficult. In this particular year, we haven't made a lot of progress, but when our interviews went with major software developers, major operators, what we hear over and over again is that they recognize the problem and they're working on the problem. And so if I were to finish with a positive thought, that's what my positive thought would be. The technical problems underlying universal acceptance are very difficult. They are one of the barriers to IDNs being accepted, but people know it, are aware of it, and are starting to work on it.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I'd like, yes, one after, with some order. I'd like first to get the remote participation question.
In Bangladesh, we find that IDNs are not as relevant to local content. The user behavior is well entrenched in latency scripts that use Bangla content. So, I question Ms. Taylor's contention that IDNs are still more important than search, or apps, or other innovations.
Thank you for that question. I think that it sort of goes back to the remarks made by Indrajit Banerjee of UNESCO just earlier, is that users have adapted their behavior to deal with lack of usability in some contexts. I think I would emphasize that the ubiquity of domain names and the fact that it is an important fact in local content, but as Mark McFadden has just emphasized, that domain names are used in a variety of different contexts and need to be internationalized across that. I'm not saying, of course, that local language content doesn't exist in other contexts, but if we looked at the evidence of the global internet and the real strength and over-representation, I would say, of English language as the primary language of web content, and then you look at the patterns that IDNs reveal, you see something different, and that should lead us to think, well, why is that, and why is that differently? Is it because actually people want to use English language as the primary language of web content throughout the world? And in many cases I've heard people say, well, actually I want to reach a global audience and it makes sense for me to use English in some contexts. But you also see, for example, I talked about the content creation in Arab states, which is happening a lot in social media, that when people kind of relax into their mother tongue, they really create content in local languages. So I wouldn't see it as a binary decision, and I wouldn't say that ASCII domain names have no role in encouraging local language content. There are multiple factors, but what we have seen is that IDNs and local language content seem to really go hand in hand. So again, to borrow from what Indrajit Banerjee said, they can be viewed as building blocks, and you can't build a house with one building block, but particularly if you're at the lower levels, you really need each and every one in order to create a strong foundation.
Thank you, Emily. Next one in a row, please. Yes, you.
Okay, Andrei Klesnik, .ru and .rf. I'll be very short. There's some good and bad news. The good news, as we talked before many times and many years, that the drivers of the IDN universal acceptance will be the large internet corporations who is implementing the email support. So we have some new good news that Gmail is finally doing something. Well, it's not yet, okay? It's working part-time, let me put it like this. But it's really good news because there'll be more followers, definitely after such a massive platform supports the IDN. And the bad news, if you look at my badge, there are 2 question marks at the end. It means .rf. So the bad news is that we have a lot of legacy software, including the United Nations one, which is really weird for me, which doesn't support the IDNs and Unicode, let me put it like this. Thank you.
Okay, we'll make sure that the Secretariat of the IGF addresses that as soon as possible. Irina, would you like to complement what Andres just said.
Actually, I want to follow the previous question and Emily's comments. And it was mentioned that users have adopted their behavior to non-IDN email addresses. I think that now businesses are trying to change these habits and to, because the IDN addresses, they probably have their biggest value currently, in current situation, current world, is the value for businesses, giving them additional ability to promote themselves if they go online. That example with the green track, and there are many, many other examples. If I'm doing a business, if I want my customers to notice me, if I'm going online, I want a good domain name. And in the old ASCII world, good domain names are occupied, they are used. But new IDN world really gives me this ability to be noticed, to be remarkable. Another observation is that the IDNs, if we are talking about CCTLD IDNs, they really need governmental support. If the government supports this initiative, it can help increase their awareness many, many times. No private company will get that amount, has that money for advertising, for building awareness as government can give you. And as a good example, I just noticed in my country, we are having the day of city of Moscow, capital. It's going to be a big celebration, yeah. And there are definitely announcements in the radio that, like, we'll have this event and this event and this event. And for details, please go to the website, which is ilovemoscow.rf. And that's probably the biggest advertising and the biggest promotion that IDNs can ever get.
Thank you, Irina. Manal, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for the presentations. Actually, it makes one optimistic to hear that the universal acceptance issue is recognized and is being worked on, because just to iterate the importance of universal acceptance to users, normally users are users. So if you're using the domain names in ASCII and you don't have a problem, you won't really care to switch to something that's not working equally smooth. And if you have a language barrier, then it becomes more problematic for you, and we're trying to resolve a language barrier issue and introduce more of a technical barrier thing, because I fully understand that users adapt and we can tell them new habits, but you cannot really change everything. I mean, we keep telling them you won't use space, you have to use a dash, you won't use, so, and then you will have xn dash dash, so please don't panic and continue. So when it becomes too many things to learn, it might be somehow creating more barriers. So I believe it's a big issue, and it's most important for all users in general, whether to really convince those who don't have language barrier to come back to their own languages. It has to really be working very smooth, and similarly, or more importantly, to those who have the language barrier. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Manal. Ongbin, please.
First, I want to give my thanks to Emily, because you have written a very good report which have covered a lot of information about China. Yeah, and we do want to let everybody know we have put great efforts on the IDN development and also the acceptance issues. And also, I also have read the reports given by Pat, and I think it has given us a lot of insights. Also, although I am a little bit disappointed that there is no .cn on your reports, it's only .tw. Yeah, and because we actually cooperate with .tw to develop the IDN issues, and this year is actually a very promising year for us with regard to the IDN development, because we have many software developers to support the IDN emails. We are trying so hard to push forward the IDN emails to the global communities, especially with regard to Postfix and Google. And this is our great achievements. But when we making this progress, we also are looking to the drawbacks to our efforts, and we actually found that in Chinese market we are too overemphasizing the big companies. Yeah, because we are trying to do more marketing to the big companies, and we have a little coverage to the startups. This is what we haven't, what we have done, and we are not so satisfied about that. And because right now we see there's a lot of market potential for the startups. And in China, actually the internet market is a little bit strange. The big gets even bigger, and the startups are fade away quite quickly. So because the big companies, they already have very nice ASCII domain names. They don't have the incentives to push forward the non-ASCII ones, and the users already know the famous ASCII domain names. They don't have the incentive to access the non-ASCII domain names. So the Chinese users already get adapted to the ASCII domain names. So they seems to don't like to use the non-ASCII ones. And right now we are trying to move forward to focusing on the startups, because when you see the startups, they actually can bring us more innovative products. And if they have such kind of products, and they have a direct link with the non-ASCII domain names, I think that would be a very promising message for us to pushing towards the non-ASCII domain names, IDN domain names. And right now, we are going to have a marketing campaign, which we ask about 50 companies, they are all startups, to give a showcase of how they use non-ASCII domain names. And we want people to know that the IDN domain names can be used in this way. It's an innovative way. And they are not even comparable with the ASCII ones. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hongbin, and I'd like to thank you again for the really, was a great pleasure to visit Scianica last year, and for me and Emily, I think was really an incredible experience to learn how much you have done, not only at IDN level, but also to engage with the local community to promote the domain names in your country. So thanks again for that. I'd like to give the floor, if she likes, maybe, to Minji Kim from Korea. So you may have time to react to Pat Kane's statement about how much his English is appreciated in Korea, and also give us some information about your experience with IDN in Korea. Thanks a lot, Minji.
Hate English, and I want to say just a brief case in Korea. As you know, Korea IDN service is really good. So we just surveyed a lot about the universal acceptance. So browser system and mobile phone at the IDN service is really good and improved than last year. But there is some complaints about EAI, email address internationalized. So in KISA have the plan to fund aging to the registrar For example, if the registrar to set up the email server, he's a little bit of matching fund, so fund 8. So if the registrar set up the email server, the universal acceptance will be better, so customers will be better. So that's our little bit of short plan for the universal acceptance. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think I remember that last year in, at the local, the regional IGF in Seoul, Minjun Park, your colleague, announced that the very first fully email experience was tested and launched.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question from the remote participation, and then you, please.
User behavior on the internet assumes latency creep. A good set of applications are required to make the case for IDNs. Just universal acceptance is not enough. That only push the technology forward, when user behavior is what really must be focused on.
I think that's absolutely right, and some of the exciting developments that have happened in the last year, which highlighted in the report, is that there is some evidence of software tools for application developers out there in the mobile market being available. The thing is that probably not very many people know about them, and that they're not mandated, or they're not there by default, that you have to go out and look for them. But absolutely, but it is, again, it's stepping stones. You can't really start to have multilingualism in addressing if you can't actually support those characters. Then you can't really have them in cool applications unless they actually work in the standard ways that we would expect to use the email. I'm really interested in the remarks made by Hongbin Zhu of CNNIC about the focus on startups and small and medium-sized enterprises, which for a country code registry is exactly the right emphasis, in my opinion, because it's there that you will get the people and businesses that are less familiar with the Latin script, that are much better served by local language, and wanting to make, as Irina said, when you're starting your business, you want a good domain name, and you want something that's memorable and meaningful, and that people can type in and get to where they want to be. And the wonderful example from KISA, the Korean registry, about just an incredibly practical intervention, which is to match funding to encourage people to get their email servers compliant. What a simple and incredibly effective and practical step to take. So it's, to get to where we want to be, it is multiple actors taking small steps and working together to get that multilingualism happening.
Thank you, Emily. I take the last question from the floor. Please.
Thank you very much. Satish from India again. Thanks for the encouraging news on the work being done on the technology front. I'd like to place one specific point for the consideration of the technology people, and this has to do with the disabled and the access to IDNs. The IDNs are likely to instantly break many of the screen readers and user agents that the disabled are using currently. Maybe some work on this would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Fully agree.
Okay, really quick from Fad. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. This will be really quick. So one of the things we're doing within our region, the Middle East, to promote IDN uptake and probably even developing solutions for the usage of IDNs, mainly the issue of universal acceptance, is that we're targeting let's say university students, whether undergrads or graduate students, as well as entrepreneurs, and actually encouraging them to actually develop software and probably device solutions for universal acceptance issues related to IDNs.
Thank you, Fad. And Mohammed, just to balance the regions, because otherwise we'd like also to hear a bit more from the African region.
Okay. I hope I don't really be between you and your lunch and breaks. Okay, I think first I'm happy to be here in this room with 4 or 3 of the old IDN guidelines working group members, here Pat and Ram. I'm really optimistic about the issue of global acceptance. I mean, with all the complexity there, it will be resolved. There's a drive for it, commercial drive to resolve it. There is also consumer demands. And just to give you one example, there's some work has been done for Arabizing or localizing famous software, social media applications like Twitter. And the moment that Twitter, with the support crowdsourcing of individuals in the region, introduced the Arabic hashtag, that exploded the use of Arabic language in Twitter. I think now Saudi Arabia is the most active users within Twitter currently. So I suspect that with Google now step, others will be coming, and then we will see really a huge use in terms of IDNs. It's normal. The registries have started operation the last 2-3 years. I'm running currently an IDN CSTLD, and basically we are in operation the last 2 years. This is a normal progress of R&D and software development. The DNS industry took, I think, 20 years for some of those applications surrounding the DNS to really be up to the level that we are now. So I don't think that's a normal progress of resolving things. I think there was huge expectations initially when we were applying for IDN CSTLDs and we were preparing to launch them. But the reality is now there is multiple issues that we need to address. ASCII.IDN is not usually the normal thing, by the way. Yes, maybe for the legacy situations, that has become the normal practice currently. But the normal is IDN.IDN. For example, if you're using Arabic, switching keyboards is not a good thing. It's also a bad user experience from the other side. So you need to look at it from different perspectives as well. So it's not normal for an Arabic domain name to be an IDN.ASCII. So that will be, the evolution will happen. I'm sure soon we'll have IDN.IDN operational. We are also seeing at the registry I'm running in Qatar, we're seeing also the same percentages, I think globally, about 3 to 4% of the current registrations are IDNs. And the majority, yes, the majority are redirections to current existing websites or redirection to Arabic pages, because also you need to understand that there is lots of entities who does multilingual websites. So basically, official organization could have English and Arabic websites as well. So the same patterns as Pat and the report identified already on the IDN CSTLDs, we're experiencing that. But I think eventually it will happen. It's just a matter of time and a major players really stepping and resolve issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohamed. And from your words, I'd like to make some concluding remarks. As you said, IDN.IDN should be the normal way for end users to approach the internet. That's really important. It's really important to educate the end users to it, educate also all the different players in this complex market. So not only registries, but also registrars, international organizations, governments, everybody who might contribute to make sure that the full IDN experience is enjoyed by the end users. I heard some sort of mixed feelings, positive, negative. IDN will make it. There's going to be a huge uptake, maybe not. Some issues still at acceptance level. But I think the majority of us in this room agree that IDN will make it. And as Mohamed just said, it's just a matter of time, just a matter of making sure that people they get more familiar to a different way of enjoying the internet. And as also Mohammed said, the more we do, the more we believe in this, the more players will step in and make sure that we are on the same page. So that said, I'd like to thank all the attendees, all the panelists, UNESCO, VeriSign, the regional CCTL organization for having contributed to this year's report. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll see each other next year for a further update, and thanks a lot to Emily who coordinated this monumental work of putting together these pieces of this report. So thanks everybody.
If anybody would like a memory stick with a copy of the report on, you can get them from Giovanni.
Excuse me, whose mobile is this? Yours?
Okay, yeah. Just to let everyone know, we're still waiting for a couple of panelists. Just in case you wonder why we haven't started. And we've decided to be a bit democratic with the setting, so you can sit wherever you want. Can someone close the door, because otherwise there's too much noise? Okay. Oh. All right, thank you. Welcome to workshop 94, creating, protecting and providing access to digital culture. Is sound okay now? It's okay, okay. Yeah, I was expecting we were going to struggle a bit with the sound. My name is Andrés Guadamux, not Guadamux as it's written here, and I'm a senior lecturer in intellectual property law at the University of Sussex. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and we have a great panel. Paolo and Stuart are I think, the organizers of the event, and also they'll be speaking. We'll conduct this in a very nice and informal manner, seeing that we have a nice, cozy room with a nice number of attendants. I always start panels and presentations and everything with stories, and I'm just going to have a very short to introduce the topic. When I started teaching intellectual property, the internet was still sort of fresh and new. And my students started writing in their dissertations and essays variations of the theme, the internet has changed everything. And every single dissertation started, the internet has changed everything, and it was all, I had to tell them at some point, if you write a variation of the internet has changed everything into an essay or a dissertation, I'm going to fail you. And they stopped doing that. But needless to say, it's actually true. The internet has changed quite a lot of how we look at the dissemination of culture, dissemination of information. And this panel is all about that. It's about creating, protecting, providing access to digital culture, and the means in which we have we're conducting this, and we're creating culture, but also disseminating it and having access to it has changed quite a lot. And these changes, the developments that we've encountered are creating challenges for industry, for creators, for the memory institutions, for users in general, and policymakers, regulators, and bodies like the IGF. We have to come up with answers, and this panel is going to look at challenges, but also maybe solutions, legislative solutions, policy solutions, market solutions, problems that the users have encountered, and hopefully that'll create a very nice discussion on some of the challenges that we are encountering. We have a fantastic panel, so without further ado, I'm going to start with Stuart Hamilton, who is Deputy Secretary General of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA. And he's going to be talking to us about, I guess, the library perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Andres, and good afternoon, everybody. Copyright's a great subject to be discussing at 20 to 5 at the end of a long day, but I guess we'll give it a go. Although there are actually more issues than just copyright involved in a discussion of access to digital cultural output. When we were coming up with the idea for this workshop, we were drawing from IFLA's perspective on a report that we released last year called the IFLA Trend Report. And if you haven't come across this yet, I'd recommend that you go to trends.ifla.org, where you can find a document that we worked on for a year, along with some internationally renowned experts, to tell us about the changes that were going to occur in society over the sort of next 10 years. Not the changes that were going to occur in libraries, but the changes that were going to occur in society, so that librarians could work out how to deal with them. Now, one of the things that goes up front in this trend report is a little bit of an explanation of just how much digital information we have out there at the moment. So in 2010, the quantity of information transmitted globally exceeded 1 zettabyte for the first time, and that's now expected to double every 2 years. Hands up who can give me a definition of a zettabyte? I suspect, no, I can't give you a definition of a zettabyte, I have to look it up. But internet traffic over the last decade has actually risen by 13,000%. There's been more digital information created between 2008 and 2011 than in all of the previous recorded history. And now to put it into some sort of context for those of you who like the NSA, the National Security Agency's new center in Utah will be open as of September just gone. It's capable of storing up to 12 exabytes of information. That's 12,000 petabytes. But to put that in perspective, only 400 terabytes would be needed to store all the books ever written in any language. So with 1,000 terabytes in 1 petabyte, that's less than 1% of the NSA's new storage capacity. So if that hasn't completely blinded you with numbers, the fundamental point is that there's a lot of digital information out there. Now, as librarians, we kind of love content. We really love content. Without content, we wouldn't be able to stock our libraries, we wouldn't be able to put books on shelves, we wouldn't be able to have information resources in our databases. And of course, that means that we love creators as well, because creators are the people that actually help us make libraries what they are. With all of this new digital, born digital information coming out, plus the work that libraries are doing to digitize old materials, you can see that many of our institutions are going to be really snowed under with a lot of work in the future. And because we've always really played society's traditional role in collecting and preserving and making available our cultural, scientific and research content. But I guess the question for us now, and one of the reasons why we're sort of convening this panel, is whether or not libraries can keep up. Is it actually possible for us to continue to preserve, store and make available all of this information? And I'm unfortunately tempted to sort of say it's going to be very difficult for us. I'm going to stop short of saying no, we can't. But I do think that because of this content explosion, we're in danger of having a massive black hole in the middle of our cultural record. And the reason for this, I think, is the reason for this is to do with copyright. I think if we're going to fix this black hole, we're going to have to fix copyright. And as anyone who's ever been involved in these discussions will tell you, that's a very difficult thing to do. Some of you will have been in the previous workshop looking at copyright, so I won't repeat too much of that. But basically, if you ever get involved in copyright reform negotiations, you should expect to be in it for the long run, and you should expect to come out of it very bruised. What you can do, it seems, in copyright at an international and national level is increase enforcement of copyright. This seems to actually be possible. There's a very strong lobby that's behind that, and it's understandable. There's a lot of money involved in content. But from libraries' perspective, we haven't been able to introduce more flexibility into the international copyright system. We need that flexibility because in some countries we actually don't have the legal frameworks for preservation of information. We don't quite know whether, when we preserve a born digital work, whether we're actually doing something legal or illegal. And as I said in the previous workshop, what we love most after content is doing things right. We don't really feel comfortable going off grid and basically copying everything, because that's not really how we roll. Now, we do have some capacity to do this in some countries around the world, particularly in the European Union, North America. The countries that within the WIPO system are called the Group B countries, the developed industrial countries. They often have relatively flexible copyright exceptions, which will let you do a lot of this digital preservation work. However, with born digital content comes licenses and contracts. Which really shifts things from the days when libraries were able to hand over $10,000 for a number of a really nice sized collection. It's in print material, first sale and exhaustion applies, and we're able to do with that material whatever we want. Now we're licensing material directly from publishers, and quite frankly, we're not buying that material. It is what it says. We are licensing it, and licenses come with terms and conditions. And we did a survey from the British Library almost 10 years ago, but we've updated it. I think 96% of the contracts that the British Library studied in their own environment, 96% overrode the available copyright exceptions and limitations. So on the one hand, we have a problem that we don't have adequate flexible copyright exceptions for this digital preservation. On the other hand, when we do have these good exceptions, often they're overridden by contract. And then there's a third element which I think is relevant to this discussion, which is that very few countries around the world have working electronic legal deposit legislation. For those of you who don't know, legal deposit is when a country enacts a law so that at least one copy of everything published in print form can be deposited at a designated national library, and that goes into the cultural record. Now, this is a problem for us when it comes to preservation, and I'm not going to go on at length here because we've got other speakers and we can pick this up in the questions, but I guess the fundamental thing I wanted to say in my opening intervention is that we're feeling a little bit stuck. We're fully aware of all of this huge amount of information. We want to do something about it, but a combination of outdated copyright frameworks, contracts and licenses, and now much needed, but unfortunately lacking electronic legal deposit leaves us wondering where our saviour is going to come from. And I can talk a little bit more later about how we might solve that problem.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm going to eat a little bit into the time because I have a pressing question precisely about deposits that I think, because you didn't spend all of your time, I think I can ask you immediately. I think the issue of preservation of digital content and legally mandated has been great for traditional books. I used to work in Edinburgh, next door practically to the National Library of Scotland, which is the national copyright repository in Scotland, and it was fantastic. As a researcher, you could go and spend hours and hours and hours being a book geek, obviously, looking at the books, and you always knew that you could find work. And this is something that worries me greatly for researchers, but also in the interest of our culture, that we're potentially losing large amounts of digital-only information because we just haven't even thought about enacting some form of regulation, or even some form of mandate that will allow publishers to curate some of this wealth of digital content. And you're saying that there is no easy solution, but if I gave you the power tomorrow to change the world, what would you, how would you use it? How would you make digital curation and repositories possible?
Well, first of all, it's a bit sad that you put a caveat on the end of my powers there, because I was quite looking forward to being able to do a bit more than just digital preservation. But I think at the moment we have what we're calling a patchwork of provisions around the world that let you do certain things. So, for example, the Library of Congress in the United States preserves tweets. That to me seems like a Sisyphean task, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not entirely sure where they're going with that, but nevertheless, at times when there are great social upheavals, and I'm thinking about Arab Spring, I'm thinking about things where really people take to social media, it can be really instructive to be able to curate those pieces of born digital material. Whether or not that's actually legally possible outside of the United States, I'm not entirely sure. So you'll have one country being able to do something like that. You'll have another country like the United Kingdom who's just passed a new sort of legal deposit act, which I have to say is extremely disappointing, which is a shame because they've done quite well in terms of some other copyright reform recently. But the new Electronic Legal Deposit Act in the UK, I'm glad you said you liked going to the library to look at books, because now, in the age of the internet, we're going to have an Electronic Legal Deposit Act, which if you ever want to see what we're actually collecting, you better be prepared to get into your car and then bring your tablet to the library. So we have some interesting challenges in front of us whereby the people making policies about these things, it's not joined up, there's no mandate that goes across countries, and we're not really seeing any awareness that actually library users won't want to necessarily drive all the way to a physical library when they know they can use the internet to access these resources. So we have a problem of expectations with our users. If I was going to use the powers that you've given me, I would make sure that what IFLA is trying to do at WIPO succeeds, and there we are trying to put an international copyright framework for libraries and archives together that's going to set some basic standards for copyright exceptions around the world. Now that means not that everybody has harmonized exceptions, but that everybody would have to have a basic set of exceptions for libraries and archives. And that's quite important. We don't necessarily want everybody to have the same bit of language in every sort of country, but we want to be able to make sure that information can cross borders and that people are actually able to do this digital preservation in such a way that it's not just the US and the EU that's keeping track of their cultural heritage.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting. I want to comment on the megalomania that is implied in my question, that those powers are mine to give. I hope no one will mind that. Okay, our next presenter is Paolo Lanteri. He is the legal officer at the World Intellectual Property Organization. And yeah, Paolo, the room is yours.
Well, something like that. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andres, and thank you very much, Stuart, for setting the scene in a very nice and broad way. I may start by perhaps disappointing the audience by saying that WIPO, as an organizer of this workshop, in fact is here with more questions than answers. We don't have answers yet. There are several processes ongoing, and we are hosting some of those processes. So if we had an answer, we would probably not need to have this kind of forum for discussion with so many stakeholders. The reason for organizing this workshop for the World Intellectual Property Organization is in fact to get a better idea from practitioners in the field, from libraries, from users, and from, of course, right holders, on what are the real concrete challenges in the day-to-day life, in the distribution, well, creation, distribution, access, and preservation of born digital content. We have heard, and being a lawyer surrounded by librarians, I'm not here to quote any data. We already heard some astonishing data on the impact, on the scope of the problem we are talking about, and numbers told by themselves. Digital is the rule rather than the exception. There are many challenges ahead that have not been addressed, and still copyright legislation has been devised for an analog environment. This is a sort of fact. One starting point I would like to stress is that really the acknowledgement of the importance of the issue is a well-achieved result. We are discussing this here, but in 2014 is the 10th anniversary, the 10th birthday of limitation and exceptions issue in the agenda of the Standing Committee on Copyright and Related Rights. Nothing more and nothing less than the broadest, the largest norm-setting forum where more than 187 member states and more than 300 NGOs are contributing to a debate focused to a possible normative solution focused on limitation exceptions to copyright. Of course, the process is lengthy, but let me give you some obvious remark on that. Technology moves faster than law, and there are some good reasons for that. And particularly when we talk about born digital material, not all the problems are copyright-specific problems. We also have, and we need to budget in economic and technological problems consideration when we want to look at concrete solution. So copyright is part of the puzzle, and there's been ongoing discussion, and I think there is also a broad agreement on the need for limitation and exception for libraries and archives. Where the agreement is missing among the international community is on how to achieve these limitation and exceptions for libraries and archives. So without any purpose of giving any copyright lecture, I think it's good always to remind ourselves where we stand on this point, and remind ourselves, lawyers, how the system works. In fact, treaties recognize rights, and at the same time they provide for a principle that allows countries to provide limitation and exceptions to those rights. The three-step test principle. I think we can enter into that if someone is interested in the details, but what is the result of this? The result of this is the current copyright framework. Fragmented, territorial, where member states have freedom to decide what are the limitations to copyright. So it may well be that in one country a library is allowed to make a reproduction for preservation purposes, maybe multiple reproduction and format shifting and so on. In others, no, there is nothing in the law. But there is no argument about the need for allowing libraries to perform their function. And here we're talking about, this is the system, how it works. The crucial point of the debate, at least as I see it, is not only about libraries and archives, it's about changing the system, reinverting the system. That is not only saying, you member states, you Italy, you England, you need to recognize the right of production, communication with the public and so on, but you must also make sure that your libraries are allowed to make reproduction, multiple reproduction, format shifting for preservation. So I think it's an argument to partially justify the lengthiness of the process, at least. In this system, I cannot omit to mention that there is a remarkable exception to this system. It is a quite recent exception, is the Marrakesh Visually Impaired Treaty that was signed a little bit more than 1 year ago, that actually established an obligation for future member party to that treaty to have in their legislation provisions that will allow access and exchange, cross-border exchange, enabling access for the visually impaired to printed content. Without entering into detail of that, this is a remarkable exception that we can also argue is not really speeding up the debate on the other issues, because it's the first important thing. So we are at the edge of a potentially huge change in the balance of the system. Nevertheless, the international community have invested huge resources, 10 years of work of people like you, Stuart, and many others in this room, like me that worked in the Secretariat, and member states, going to that meeting, meeting room in Romania, in Geneva, and making the case for this need. What has produced all these efforts, 10 years of work? Basically, in concrete terms, two things. One is a document, which I rather call with the code than the full title, because it would take 15 minutes to pronounce it, is a document, this is /26/3, that is a working document on a possible instrument for limitation and exception for the benefit of libraries and archives. It's not the exact quotation, but I can provide it with that if you wish. And it includes several topics. Many of them have already been mentioned by Stuart, like preservation purposes. Also, very importantly, there are some part of the document that discuss the relation between limitation and exceptions and contracts, cross-border effects and cross-border uses of those content. Member states also made sure we produce some information material, like several studies, very informative studies, 9 studies on limitation and exceptions, looking at how countries have actually implemented those treaties. In particular, one that was published in 2008, the Kenneth Cruz study on limitation and exception for libraries and archives, have been, by mandate of member states, requested to undertake an update. And for the interest of everyone, the plans are to release the update of this study at the incoming CCR in December of this year. So let's wait for the numbers, let's wait for the figures, but already the general feeling is that from 2008 many things have changed, possibly not enough, and if in 2008 we had a little bit more than 120 countries covered by the study that included limitation and exception that were applicable to libraries and archives, we hope to have more in 2014, but still, if you look at objectively at the limitation and exception system, they are mostly devised and created for the analog environment. And we told at the beginning that digital is the rule and not the exception. This is a fact. I think we can all agree on that. So this is where we stand in terms of norm setting processes. A brief mention to what are the other means that are in the tools that are in the hands of a United Nations agency like WIPO to help a member state to develop their copyright system in a balanced way. We provide legislative assistance to member states, which is based on a demand process. It's on demand and is tailor-made and focused on specific requests of a member states. This activity is extremely important, and WIPO provide this service really with a neutral bilateral way, and it doesn't have any mandate to follow up on potential new copyright reforms. So we can do only what member states ask us to do. Then there is another line of work that is, I think, in this field is crucial, which is copyright infrastructure, which is technology, data. Whenever we can, WIPO support technologically these countries. We already have some services in the field of copyright, WIPO calls for collective management, GDA, which is the Gestione del Ricercatore for copyright registration, and there is starting initiative called Global Data Management that will scope all content, all market content, and look at possible common solution in terms of technological management of rights and also limitation and exceptions. And then finally we also organize things like this, which we believe are still very important, that raise awareness, capacity building, and many other things in cooperation with many other stakeholders. So this, with that, I would conclude my intervention, going back to the initial remark that the reason why we are here is that we are really looking for new ideas and inputs on what we could improve in our mission, and how the international community could actually better engage in this challenge of having an IP system that is really suited for the new challenges. Thanks a lot. So I'm looking for the contribution from all the participants and the speakers.
Thanks, Paolo. I have a couple of questions, but they will be eating into the other speakers' time, so we'll save them for later if possible. But I have, continuing the megalomania theme, I have a couple of ideas of creating an island with a big global repository. So let's think about that. Okay, so next is Cristiana González, who is from the Comité Gestor da Internet no Brasil. My Brazilian pronunciation is very bad.
Well, I would say that I'm representing actually University of São Paulo because.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And I was going to say also University of São Paulo, but Brazil is such a leader in some of these topics, and she's going to give us some of the perspectives from developing country perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, indeed, we have been a leader at the WIPO development agenda, but I give a shift on the discussion, and because if people get tired of going to Geneva and to be part of WIPO negotiations, they can just change the agenda to the file sharing legalization agenda, which is one of the topics that we are going to try next year in Brazil, and reforming the copyright law. So I would like to present this idea of file sharing. That's not a new idea. We have lots of countries that have already tried that. We have like Sweden, Norway, we have Canada, we have Portugal. Lots of countries try to approve laws related to that. So, and this idea is very connected to the copyright fights that oppose creators and users, consumers on the one side, and publishers, intermediaries, and copyright holders. So those copyright fights and most of the copyright laws are based on not very reliable data. That's what we discovered not discovered, but what we are researching in Brazil. So those industry reports, their methodology never is clear, and when it's clear or open or available for researchers or for the public, they are extremely biased. So some university study shows that there are no economic advantages for developing countries, especially when think about law enforcement against pirates, or what I prefer to say, the share of unauthorized copies. For example, when you look at pirates at countries like Brazil, like Mexico, Bolivia, and India, the findings are that the main cause of piracy is a combination of high prices for cultural goods, low incomes, and increasingly cheap digital technologies. So when the industry talks about the culture of not respecting intellectual property, they do not consider the real issues like the prices, incomes, and the cheap technology that are the main causes of this phenomenon. So the second thing that must be noticed is that after seeing a lot of initiatives of enforcement through the years, we do not find any data that demonstrates the effect on the general availability of pirated goods. So there is no positive effect on the industry growth when we have strong enforcement laws or public policies. So there is also a series of studies that shows that on the other side, for example, there is a Harvard study that shows that downloaded music does not affect record sales. There is an European Union research project called Music Lessons, which shows music sales are not affected positively by file sharing. There is more recent research from 2013 from London School of Economics showing that the copyright industry appears to be doing well. That pirate copying doesn't appear to harm the industry, and that the struggle against piracy may harm innovation entrepreneurship. There is also a book called Media Piracy in Developing Economies that was written by Sean Flynn and Joe Karagianis at the Columbia University that argues that it's socially normative to pirate copy, that the stopping piracy seems to have failed. So there is no reason to keep going with the law enforcement and the piracy, all this piracy fight against, especially against developing countries. There is also, and I'm not talking only about developing countries, when you look at the developed world, like especially US and Germany, there is also some data that shows that copied, shared, or downloaded for free music and TV shows, that you have like half of the population doing that. Which is a phenomenon that some call the copy culture. So among the solutions that we have been discussing for years, you have like the whole agenda on exceptions and limitations. That's very important for us, especially in the developing world. We also have the licensing options like the Creative Commons and another kinds of licenses, but they are not the solution of the problem. They're just in the middle of the way to finally stop this fight. And then we came up with this idea of the legalizing file sharing in Brazil, because we are also facing this. And the main idea is that, and this could sound like a freaking idea when think about, because, but it's a remarkable initiative in terms of access to knowledge. Although we have lots of political pressure for not having it, and even among activists, there is not still a consensus, but we need to put that in public and discuss that. So the main idea of file sharing legalization is that the non-commercial file sharing will be authorized, and each broadband user will pay for a modest fee. Like in Brazil, we got a number of almost $2. And this fee comes together with the monthly internet service provider bill. So the ISP will collect the fees and distribute it to the collecting society comprised of authors associations that will then distribute to the collected fees in the proportion of the works that have been downloaded. So who is going to pay? Our broadband home users is going to pay this fee. And also, so some must be asking, is this fee sufficient? If you think, if you compare with the today revenue of the industry, this would represent approximately 115 million per year for the industry. And for sake of comparison, this represents approximately 55% of the 4 largest record companies' revenues. So it's a lot more that they are having now. So, and who will receive this fee? Not only the industry, the creators through their collecting societies. So at least 60% of the amount collected will be distributed to a physical person, musicians, composers, writers, and so on. So authors will also gain much, much more than they are having now. And what will be authorized? Only non-commercial file sharing through different technologies, including music, films, and books, affecting every kind of use that we're trying to have now, like for educational purposes, for libraries, for visually impaired. And what about the traditional means of commercial cultural goods? So they're not going to be affected, because all these studies that we have now are proven that the file sharing is not affecting their revenues. So that's the main that I'm going to put in the table for discussion further.
Thank you. That was fascinating. I've been quite interested in some of these examples of legalizing file sharing or creating a legalized system, some form of revenue system as well. I've been fascinated as well by the things like arg.org, which is actually piracy, but I shouldn't mention that. There is academic file sharing in a way, people sharing their own research, putting it anonymously so that other researchers can have access to that. So I'm already eating up into too much time, so I'll jump right away. We'll keep this for the discussion. Next is Makane Faye. He's the chief of the Knowledge Management Section and Library Services of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Thank you, Ifla Stuart, for giving us this opportunity to be a panelist here on this important issue of access to information and knowledge and the problems which hinder this process. I would like to say that scientists, researchers, and all other users in African countries face problems in accessing the world's research published information. The cost of acquiring current publications, paper and digital form, from shelves, databases, and repositories is very high. This results in relying on exchange programs of libraries, archives, and documentation centers to have access to current knowledge. To mitigate these problems, some of the libraries facilitate electronic access to digitized collections, both in the Africa region and elsewhere. They also benefit from interlibrary loans. However, with the copyright issues, access to photocopying, sharing, reproduction, and distribution of certain types of documents is prohibited. Not only this creates access problem, but also issues related to restoration and preservation of documents, which cannot be done with the current copyright regime, and leads to a lot of documents being destroyed and a lot of information being lost. This unfortunate state of affairs is created by the absence of appropriate legislation and laws adapted to the technological evolution and the wide use of the internet. In fact, the copyright law has been struggling to adapt to the dynamic impact of internet and digital technologies. We know that the copyright regime was put in place to promote creation by ensuring fair rewards to the creators. Now it has almost become a barrier to the knowledge economy and an impediment to promote access to knowledge and, of course, innovation. Accordingly, at ECA we believe that there is a need to review the evolution of the copyright policies, because what we see today is that creators are enjoying bigger protection while the users are being penalized. When we are working in the framework of the World Summit on the Information Society, which advocates for information and knowledge society for all. And I believe that 2 months ago at the WSI's Plus 10 review, the outcome document indicated in Article 16 that we need to ensure the preservation of digital heritage in the information society by putting into place cohesive, conceptual, and practical digital strategies supported to the extent practicable at international level for the preservation of and access to recorded information in the digital environment in all its forms while respecting individual privacy. However, the multitude and diversity of stakeholders invested in the copyright law and policy with their own perspective, with their own interest and diverging interests, which in fact profit to the creators, it is very difficult for our community of knowledge workers to advance our agenda. To conclude, I propose that we work towards identifying a redefined purpose of copyright to take into account the knowledge economy into a fully web-integrated copyright framework. I believe that this can be done by adopting, endorsing, promoting the draft which was prepared by IFLA, the treaty proposal on limitations and exceptions for libraries and archives, published in December 2013, so that this can be owned by member states and put forward to the Standing Committee on Copyright and Related Rights at WIPO. I conclude by quoting former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, who indicated that with information on our side, with knowledge and potential for all, the path to poverty can be reversed. Thank you.
Thanks, that was excellent. It's a good call to arms in this subject. I think that what we need is legislative solution mostly, or treaty solution. I think that's an excellent point. So last but not least is Arlette Becking. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Baking.
Baking, sorry.
But
Yeah.
my Dutch colleagues do it wrong all the time, so it's okay.
One of the advantages of chairing a session is that I get to do to other people what they do to me all the time, mispronouncing my name.
Yes.
Sorry. But she comes representing IGF, but also Pictorite, which is an author's right organization for virtual creators in the Netherlands. So it looks
That's true.
quite fascinating.
Yes, thank you for the short introduction. I'm very happy to be here today, and my name is Arlette Becking. I work as a project manager for Pictorite and also as a legal counsel. Pictorite is a collective management organization in the Netherlands. We represent visual artists, photographers, designers, illustrators, cartoonists, and also architects. I'm also on behalf of the International Authors Forum today. This is a forum for authors organizations, and they collaborate with other organizations representing authors worldwide. Today I would like to talk briefly with you about mass digitization by cultural archives in the Netherlands. In the recent past, a lot of subsidies have been given to by the Dutch Ministry of Culture to cultural archives. This comes forth from the digital agenda of Europe in order to digitize, amongst others, books, newspapers, magazines, and images. The cultural archives all started to digitize in order to put their collections online, well, in the Netherlands then. These collections had always been inside the archives, and the archives didn't have so much to do with copyright until then. Sorry, I'm not very fast with the with the clicking. Well, this led to a problem for them because the current system of copyright in the Netherlands is that permission is needed from every right holder. And when you look at an archive which we have in the Netherlands, the Dutch Royal Library, it has digitized 3 million pages. And when you think about that every page has, well, 5 articles and images, it means that 15 million works have to be to get permission from the maker or the legal entity behind it. So that that led to an enormous obstacle for them. So in 2009 we started talking with them, and we have come with a solution. I'm sorry. We took a look at the extended collective licensing system in Scandinavia, and we thought about, well, maybe it is possible to come up with a solution so that the archive can put the whole collection online at once. And the way we do it, we have agreed on several contracts now, is by granting a collective license and also by giving an indemnification with a maximum. And in this way, the archive can show all of the articles and images online. We do want a right holder to have the possibility to opt out if he doesn't or her doesn't agree with it. But by making the collective contracts work, we also can grant a remuneration for the visual artists, all the visual artists which are in the archive. So not only the artists which are at Pictorite, but everybody can get a remuneration. An example, well, I already mentioned it, is the Royal Library. Well, it works, the contract, but there are a few visual artists who opted out, and photographers, and well, that leaves with so another problem arises is the images of those visual artists are now on black, so you cannot see it. So the cultural archive is not complete anymore. So it might not be the best way, but well, with this contract, the Royal Library it is possible to show the archive. Another archive we have made an agreement with is the National Archive. There are 350,000 images inside this archive. They cannot make reproductions when they want to make a reproduction for other users. And then I mean physical reproductions or giving licenses. That's not possible, but when that situation is, when somebody wants a reproduction, they have to go back to the right holder. But well, I think it's a good way to put it all online. Well, I already mentioned some individual right holders who don't want their works in an archive. But another obstacle is also that there is no legal framework to make these contracts. We're just trying to develop a solution, but well, we don't know what will happen when it comes before the judge. Also, we have experienced a lot of unwillingness at Dutch archives. Not all of them, but well, most of them, they don't want to pay a remuneration. That's a big problem, and I can understand that from their perspective, because of course you rather put the money into new digitization projects. I understand that, but the archive is filled with works of right holders, so, well, you have to do something. I don't think you can get it all for free. So, with the unwilling archives, we have started 2 lawsuits, and it looks positive, but, well, it's also not the way we would want it to go. So, well, we'll see how it develops. A solution, I think, well, I already mentioned it, might be extended collective licensing. the Dutch Ministry of Culture already commissioned the research on this topic, because the Orphan Works directive has to be implemented really soon. So we're hoping on a good new legal framework, but until that we have to we will continue with this. And I have a question for the public or the audience, whether it is nonsense to charge cultural archives or it's okay. But I don't think you will say yes.
We can talk.
Yes, yes.
That's thanks. That's fascinating. I have too many questions to everyone. I think we just have quick 1 minute to ask you a very quick question arising from what you just said. What was the basis of the two cases?
The basis?
Was there
well, we
direct infringement?
We did a collective action for all the visual artists who are at Pictorite, but we also we named a couple of visual artists like Dali and and photographers. We claimed rights for them specifically. So and there's and we also claimed amounts of money for them in advance to the the archive has to do how do you say that? When we will win, the archive has to say which works they all use, and then they have to. But
no, that's
that was the basis. Yes,
yeah. It was quite interesting.
But the collective action will probably be okay. Yes.
I'll have to look into that. It sounds fascinating.
Yes.
So that leaves us very nice, exactly half an hour for questions and discussions, which is just as I planned it. You know, megalomania again. Time falls into place. Type of thing. So we've heard some quite interesting things. First, we'll hand it to the audience that is here to see if you have questions or comments, and to the presenters, and then for potential for online participation. So I see one hand already here. Okay. If anyone who asks a question, please tell us who you are, where you're from. Thanks.
Susan Anthony, United States Patent and Trademark Office, Alexandria, Virginia, United States. My question is simple. Where do museums fit in all of this?
Well, thanks a lot. I think it's an extremely appropriate question. I didn't want to put it in my opening remarks because it was already a lot of meat and material. But first of all, from the generally speaking, in several national legislations, limitation exceptions for libraries and archives could potentially apply, and applies in many instances for museums. And this also emerges from the Kenneth Crew study in 2008. Specifically to the future, towards the future, I think we had a major change in our discussion in WIPO, because for the first time in this fashion, the International Council for Museum came to our committee and made the case for their need for limitation exceptions. So basically, suddenly everyone started to look at the document, and we actually realized the document was already including, the draft treaty provision were already including several instances the mention of museums on the side of library, archives, and museums. Of course, we all understand there are differences. But in terms of preservations of digital assets, for instance, pictures, or in like access to the repertoire and so on, I think there are good arguments to consider them as possible beneficiaries of these limitations and exceptions. So towards the future, we also we are asked to produce a specific global survey following the same structure of libraries and archives for museums that will be available next year. And the scope of the study will be WIPO member states. So we are looking forward to that, to see really also from, beside the really, I would say, like first sight observation, like some academic research and some elaboration of what these scope research results will be. So I'm sure you are maybe.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words. I mean, Paolo said yes, that there's likely to be some potential uses of a library and archives treaty for the museums community. IFLA has a sort of strategic partnership and relationship with the big kind of IFLA equivalents in the museums, the archives, the monuments and sites. So ICOM, I think, are the organisation that comes to WIPO, or rather they've come to WIPO sort of like once or twice. So they actually haven't really been involved in this process, but they seem to be quite keen to be involved now. And that's fine, because there's elements of this which really could be picked up. But we would be concerned if the work that we've been pushing forward for 5 or 6 years was delayed, slowed. We've already noted how snail's pace this is. So we would be concerned if we took a detour off and started expanding this, notwithstanding the fact that there are elements of this treaty that could be your treaty proposal that could be useful. And the museums themselves need to get their house in order with what they want to see happen in it, because asked directly, they don't yet know. So that's obviously a bit of a stumbling block. When you ask them directly, what do you want to see in this, what do you think will happen, they haven't formulated a response to that yet. But that's not to say that there isn't an element in this which could be of benefit to them. But then we're going into a nice discussion of some sort of WIPO type politics here, just off on the left-hand side, I think.
Christiana was also going to, yes, a direct follow-up then, yeah, thanks.
I guess where I'm having some hesitation is because I do a lot of work with American Indian cultures in the United States, and I am thinking of many artifacts, but also many texts that could find themselves properly housed in a museum or an archive or a library. And at the end of the day, I would think we would all have a shared concern that similar materials are treated similarly, or maybe not. I don't know, but that's the reason for my question this morning, or this afternoon.
Before I tell Christiana to also answer, are you concerned about possible misappropriation of these artifacts, if they get housed in digital formats, or is that your concern, or I'm not sure.
Are you concerned that they won't be preserved?
Is your concern? Okay, thanks. Yeah, I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah, the Brazilian delegation and us with Brazil, we talked a little bit with ICON and some representatives of museums in Brazil, and then we raised some common points that we already have in the libraries proposed that could fit the museum's purpose, like preservations, copies for preservations, orphan works, DRM, contracts is another issue that would be the same for the museums and libraries. The protections of intermediaries, like people that work for museums, they're not the responsibility for intermediaries, and the translation rights. So we came up with these common points, and but as George said, the museums, they're not being very proactive in this, and I think that what would be more productive is like make them join the libraries in this discussion, and in order to not have like more 20 years of discussions to get a treaty.
Yes, Arlette, or no? You don't have any comments on that, or on the museums?
Well, with the museums, it's I think it's more easy to see who the right holders are, or to have a direct. They all have a direct relation to the artist. But with the preservation, I think that's perfectly fine, of course. And we already have it in the Dutch law. It's already in there. So, but with picture rights, we are having. We already have a good contract with the museum. We also have a cooperation where all the museums fall under, and they have a broad way of using. They can use it, the material, on a broad way, even on a social network. And yes. Also, well, always with the name of the artist in there, of course.
Makane, I think nothing to add. Okay. I have another follow-up on museums, but yeah, I'll leave that in case we have time. Yeah?
My name is Riyad Belushi. I'm a PhD student from Oman. I have a question for Ms. Gonzalez. You mentioned that in this legal file sharing system, that the money collected from the ISPs would be distributed depending on how many works would be like shared. How do you see the interface between that and privacy of the users? How would that be addressed?
That's one of the problems of these proposals. That's why so many activists are against it. But there is some softwares developed to protect your privacy while you are measuring that. So it would be a software that could protect you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I have a follow-up. Oh, I'm sorry, Rick Lane, 21st Century Fox. The first person spoke about how many terabytes of information are transferred now across the net? A lot. So getting back to that other question that the gentleman just asked, and you're talking about, you know, one country in Brazil, you have peer-to-peer, you legalize peer-to-peer file sharing. Who's going to keep track when other countries are tapping into that? Who's paying them? You have the cost of the collection societies. You mentioned how much was the amount of money that you would collect on $2?
Almost $2.
How much?
$2? Like
No, what was the total amount of revenue?
$115 million.
So the average price of our movies to make is $120 million. We spend $2 billion a year just on television show production, another $3.5 billion on movie production. You wouldn't even pay for one movie at one studio, the cost of the potential piracy of around the world, because if you legalize peer-to-peer in one country, what stops everybody from tapping into that .bz website and illegally sharing it all over the world, and we're only getting $115 million from Brazil?
You're gonna get $150 million for the whole globe, because if Brazil does that, the other countries must do that, because otherwise it's gonna.
But that's not necessarily the case.
Why you're gonna be a leader?
I mean, countries don't protect intellectual property now, and why would they incentivize and charge their own people when they can get it for free?
Oh, it's not for free. Authors are going.
No, but if you legalize it just in Brazil, it'll start off, you know, first 5 years, because laws take a while to pass, and you legalize peer-to-peer sharing in Brazil, you'll have people from around the world not paying into the system. And when their governments try to go back and say, oh, we are now going to charge you $2, they're going to fight back and say, no way, why are we going to pay? I mean, they're not paying the $1.99 for music now. You know, why would they pay? And plus, trying to keep track of every copyrighted work going across the net with 2 gazillion trilbytes of information and keeping track all over. I mean, you basically create a state of privacy concerns that would be second to none and make, the NSA look pretty tame by comparison.
I had a question or a follow-up, I think, to that, right here.
Yeah, just a remark. I think you're having the underlying assumption that if file sharing is legal, nobody pays for content anymore. But of course, filmmakers make revenue from cinema sales, from people paying for streaming services, from merchandise, and all of that goes into the financing of movies. So I would say it is already legal in certain legal areas to download films or to watch streams. So this has not led to nobody paying for content anymore.
But you imagine a Netflix would not exist today if you had peer-to-peer file sharing. In legal peer-to-peer file sharing in the US, if Napster case had gone the other way, or Grokster, you would not have Netflix today. What is the economic incentive for them to pay us for our content if their competitor would be a free service that's not having to pay for anything? And it's the same content.
Well, incidentally, we don't have Netflix in Germany, unfortunately, but I pay for Spotify, for example, even though I could download the same music for free, but I use Spotify as a matter of convenience, because actually being offered a service is something that people are very willing to pay for. So it's not necessarily the case that if there is a legal way of downloading something for free, that this is necessarily the most convenient way.
The rights holders. So they're being put at they would be put at a competitive disadvantage of a site that's not doing the same thing. So if you legalized it, there would be no Spotify, because who would invest in a Spotify if you can just invest in a streaming service that doesn't have to pay any licensing fees?
This is fascinating discussion, but we're turning it into a peer-to-peer debate, which is a bit different. I think that some of the proposals that are being bandied about, and some of the proposals in Brazil, but also things like academic file sharing and things like that, are very narrow, specific things that are more akin to, for example, sharing of information. But yeah, you can go for it. Yeah.
So I think there's some good points here on both sides, and I'm going to have to come back to what it means to be a librarian and a member of a great tribe that's involved in cultural preservation, so that people in the future can actually access it. People can write novels, make movies, etc., because they have access to it. And I think that libraries, and then to a similar extent over the last 10 years, the visually impaired, are getting caught up in the discussion about how easy it is to copy zeros and ones. And actually all the time that we are discussing, all the time that we conflate these two sorts of issues, we don't do anything about the big problem that the visually impaired had for such a long time. And as I said in my opening presentation, we run the risk of just letting a significant period of our digital content output just be a kind of black hole, because I think we will solve this eventually. And we'll come to some sort of arrangement. But if that arrangement is in like 10 years' time, 15 years, 20 years' time, then we call it a digital black hole. Because there's going to be plenty of stuff now. We already know that like material from the late 90s, early 2000s is in this black hole, and it's not going to get out because of copyright length of term, etc., etc. And I just can't see why as a society we'd really think that's a really good thing. So Paula, it is good to hear, and I think you're correct that there's not really any fundamental opposition to libraries kind of doing their job. But because what we're talking about here is transfer of digital files, we unfortunately get caught up in these sorts of debates, and we're going to have to start pleading, getting down on our knees and begging and saying, look, libraries, we pay license fees where we need to pay license fees. We are strict adherents to copyright. We teach our users about copyright, and I don't think there's too many other professions or intermediaries that do that with the people that come through their doors. We do media and information literacy in schools, and I know that there's elements of intellectual property in that. So we have to, unfortunately, kind of move ourselves outside of this a little bit, even though as a user of as a consumer of music and movies, I want to get into this. I find it really fascinating. But I have to keep my sort of library hat on in here and say, don't confuse the two issues, because we're going to do ourselves a disservice if we don't find a way to preserve all of this stuff.
Agreed. Any questions? Yeah.
I would like to add something about file sharing, that in Turkey, file sharing and piracy in general also serves as a way of circumventing censorship. In a country where hundreds of thousands of books are banned and hundreds of movies are still banned, we use file sharing to circumvent censorship as well.
And I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate reasons to do certain things in certain countries. That's not what the argument here, similar to the library argument. We're not talking about people using DNS, alternative DNS services to get around different things for political purposes. That's a whole different conversation. I mean, we are very much about free speech, and we love our content to get into every country. We are blocked ourselves in a lot of countries, but that's different, including just like the library issues. There are exceptions, but even your local station here, your Fox station here, there are currently 57 sites that are legally streaming their content virtually at the same time that they're doing it, and they're paying the licensing fees. And the other sites are getting advertising revenue and not paying. And that hurts the creation of local stations here.
I wish I had the powers to do something like I did with my students. If anyone mentions file sharing again, I fail you, but I can't.
I was mentioning streaming.
Yeah. Well played, sir, well played. Okay, any other question not related to file sharing? Sorry.
Can I ask a question? I think there is some interesting things here, and it's great to have you in the room, sir, because I think it can give us a different sort of perspective. And I want to pick up the extended collective licensing, because actually that is a solution. It'll be a solution in regions and in countries, and it works quite well in Scandinavia, and it's certainly been looked at, and I think questions on it in the EU copyright sort of review, and etc., etc. So we have libraries working quite happily under extended collective license agreements. It doesn't work for all of them. There's huge opposition in the US, so you're never going to get US librarians or people there. They say it's incompatible with fair use. We can't do the things, if we enter into one of these agreements, we can't do what we can already do under fair use. So we can see it as a kind of solution that is going to prolong the patchwork. So some countries can kind of get ahead, and that's pretty decent. You know, that's going to be great for the Dutch and the Scandinavians. And I'm kind of all for that in the short term, but it will prolong the patchwork. So I guess where I'd sort of bring in a bigger question here, because of course IFLA's asking for an international framework, as I said, not to harmonise, but to provide basic standards. But is there any possibility ever that we will get to a global license? And this is where I'm sort of looking at our colleague from Fox over there, just as you're checking your phone. But I mean, people now use content globally. If I want to download something tonight from eMusic, I'm expecting to be able to do it from my computer in my room and not get the message, sorry, this is not available in the Netherlands at this time, which is where my account is based. I mean, that to me is just mind-blowingly short-sighted. But I've spoken to people in the music industry, the Recording Industry Association of America, who say, look, actually we're ready to move with this right away, but the territorial nature of collecting societies means that this is practically impossible because you will destroy their business model. And we work quite closely with IFRO and these sorts of organisations, and that to me is kind of interesting, because we're then running up against an entrenched industry that basically generates its money and its profits by dividing the world up into territories at exactly the same time as most of the world's population have stopped bothering about territories on the internet. And I just wondered, from your perspective, whether a global license is ever possible.
Here's the problem with the global license is who is paying for that global license. Because what happens is you want to create local distributors within the country, within a region. You want to incentivize a cultural, if it's a show that's created in Turkey, right? You can't sell a global license to anybody for a show that may not have a global audience. And so you run into that problem. You also run into the problem of how movies sometimes are funded, which is you sell the rights to a region and they invest in the movie beforehand. It's like a Kickstarter idea. You know, you invest us early, you have the exclusivity to distribute that in your territory. That's very important for independent films. That's how they get funded, is they will sell each country and each territory before the film is made and get the dollars, then make the movie, and they have that exclusivity, no one knowing if it's going to be good or not, or being sold. You know, not every movie is successful, we wish, but it's just not the case. So what happens if you're talking about a global license, really the only ones who can do it are the big players. You know, you have a Google. They could probably afford a global license, but a company in Turkey, they can't afford a global license, you know, potentially. I don't think they have the reserves, you know, the billions of dollars that a Google or a Facebook has. So what ends up happening is you'll have a very few local distributors in a globally licensed world.
I see this a bit like, no, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I see global licensing like Netflix. I know it's been talked about before, but I always, you know, you're funding lots of things with the same pot of money, and for each orange is a new black, you get one Hemlock Grove that nobody watches. Anyone who is familiar with both shows, you get different funding, and you fund both the successes and the utterly abject and horrendous failures. Anyway, global licensing it's a nice place to end. Any questions? Any more interventions? We've meandered away from some of the topics. I did have a question that I had reserved for the panel, sort of following up on the museums question, and it's something that I've seen a concern about with regards to the digitalization of works that are in the public domain, and then memory institutions claiming copyright over that. And I was wondering if the panelists had encountered something like this, which is, let's say a museum digitizes a picture and that is in the public domain, and then they try to sell something or include a subscription fee for something like that. I was thinking if that's something that the panelists had encountered at all.
Yeah, I'd say it's bad form, as we might say in the UK. I mean, it does happen. And I think, you know, with some of you may be familiar with the Europeana project, who've been pushing quite strongly on sort of public domain licensing and stuff like this. And yeah, they try to really push people not to do things like that, because that kind of that really defeats the purpose of sort of the access to knowledge, sharing of culture. So no, we're not into that.
A question: where do they claim the copyright on the picture made of the work which is in public domain?
Yeah. Because the in the United States it wouldn't fly probably, because again, this is something I've repeated before, but the threshold is different in the United States. Probably it would not meet the threshold of originality, but digitization in Europe probably could meet the requirement, and so. The act of putting something and digitizing it, a picture, would create a new copyright. That's the idea. Yeah, I think it's.
I don't think it should work like that, but no. Yeah, 70 years might be enough.
Yeah. Yep.
But consider it from this perspective, because in another life, I also am an historian of an aspect of American history. And one of the concerns that historians have is in using materials from libraries where there is only one copy of a work that is now in public domain, or very, very few copies, very, very hard to find. So libraries often do have terms and conditions which are not imposed by copyright, because the text or illustration is out of copyright. Nonetheless, I bought the car, I washed the car, I maintain the car, I house the car, I feed the car. So shouldn't I get something when you say, I'll borrow the car? And I think that's the thought behind what a number of institutions, what a number of university libraries are doing.
Yeah, and this is connected to sort of digitization of orphan works and things like this. Sometimes these things cost a lot of money to do a mass digitization project for a publicly funded institution, hugely expensive. So often you go into a public-private partnership to do the work, and then off the back of that, you say to your private partner, you can exploit this work for N number of years. So whilst we find that, you know, that's something we have to sort of live with, our concern is making that period of commercial exploitation as short or as appropriate as possible. And I think, you know, we haven't got explicit standards and guidelines on this, but it's difficult for libraries, because if people come to you and say, right, we'll help you digitize this, and then basically we're going to make money off it for 15 years, or you're not going to get it digitized at all, and then the library looks and says, well, we can't afford to do it on our own, what do we do? Do we stick to our principles, or do we digitize the collection? So many libraries have sort of, I wouldn't exactly call it sort of dancing with the devil, but you know, you want to make sure that that period is quite tight and appropriate, I think. So yeah, that sort of thing does happen. I'm not really into the thing where, full stop, the thing suddenly then becomes a protected piece of work. So.
But at that point, you're leaving out the actual author. I mean, you're making a good deal for you. The company that's privatizing it is making a good deal for them and not paying for anything except for the investment into you guys. And who's left out in the cold is the authors who aren't being paid.
It depends, because this is what copyright exceptions are for. So, no, for society. So it depends entirely how you... So, sorry? Well, as I say, at the moment it's so difficult for us to get any digitization projects off the ground because they're so expensive. It's literally like the only, you know, for some people it's the only kind of thing, but...
Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to indicate that the libraries, the documents are used by people who are from outside for their own purpose. Sometimes it's private use, sometimes it's research use. In some of the copyright materials, they ask the person to sign and say whatever is going to use it for, to be allowed to use it. Or else the library has to pay for the copyright or whatever. And but in some countries like in Nigeria, there, as long as the document is not available in the country, you are allowed to make a copy of 3 copies of it, in fact, and make it available for research institutions and so on. So I think this aspect is very important, because the documents which you are giving to our users are most of the time are not available wherever they are giving it, because sometimes they are in the US, sometimes they are in the UK, or sometimes they are even in Swaziland, where you are in the UK, you want to use it. So it's not available in the country. So I think those are some of the exceptions really we should put emphasis on. Thank you.
No, agreed. I was going to finish with a question of, to everyone. If I gave you a wish, my megalomania powers of what would you change, but I think we've overrun. I don't know, just 1 or 2 words. What would you change of the system? Currently, if you wanted anything done with the current copyright and international regime? Anyone? If you had one wish to change, I don't know. What would WIPO do? Truty?
If I may, I won't express any WIPO's wish in this forum, but I can Paulo's wish. I think it's something that has been mentioned over and over again in this IGF, not only in this panel, that solutions to these kind of challenges, for instance, preserving the born digital material in a way that is balanced, requires not only laws, not only licensing, but requires, again, standards, technology on which we need to agree, needs to be interoperable, and cannot be left, in my, at least at first sight, cannot be completely left to private initiatives that are not linked together. I don't see, I think this is a key part of the solution, and to date I don't see any truly promising process to find this common solution, because there are astonishing technology, content ID. I mean, in Europe, I mean, I don't even I'm gonna go and mention them. They're all great, but still they won't solve the issue because you have competitors and alternatives and so on. So my wish, it's not a great wish, but at least it would be very important, I think, for the international community to set a framework that could potentially lead to a truly global and accepted solution, and that would include several players. Cannot include only governments, but it would need to include governments as well, because they are lawmakers. That's maybe a perspective of an old international civil servant, but I think we need to bring all together and try to find a common solution. This would be something that at least will let us see the light at the end of the tunnel.
On that optimistic note, I think it's a good note to end this, and I would like everyone who is left to show your appreciation for the panelists for a very excellent panel. Thanks very much.